Hello and welcome back to the studio. At the beginning of this tutorial, I had to be a little quieter than usual, so there's not a whole lot of instruction or chatting because I had just put the baby back down, so I wanted to be extra quiet while he went back into that REM cycle. But now I think we're safe. I think we're out of the woods, so I can chat a little bit more. So I did a full contour of this mushroom that we will be shading in. And if you need help with the drawing process, I do have full videos on that. I'm showing you the process here so you can kind of see my breakdown. I did divert a little bit from my reference image. Don't be afraid to change things up a little bit and get an image that's a little bit more pleasing and a little bit more interesting to you. Now that the contour is done, and I do think that the key to a good shaded drawing is a strong contour or outline, we're ready to start in on the shading. So I do have a freshly sharpened pencil. This is a B, one of my favorite pencils. This trunk, if you will, of our mushroom, you'll have to forgive me, I don't know the anatomy of mushrooms. I obviously used to have to know it for school, but I don't remember anymore. But because this has a little bit more texture, I think this would be a good option for starting out while I'm kind of still trying to find my hand, if you will. Still get back into the groove of shading. Now, one thing you might notice is that my hand is back on my pencil. I'm not close up like this like I was during the contour process. I'm a little farther back. This forces me to draw a little bit lighter because I have a little bit less force on the pencil. I can't push down as hard even if I wanted to. So it forces me to work a little bit lighter and a little bit more gently. Now, if you haven't done a lot of shading before, I recommend doing some quick shading exercises. I'll try and have some links down below or just give you some different ideas. But it just helps to get your hand warmed up. Now I'm going in a different direction. I was originally going up and down, and now I'm going to switch directions slightly. I'm going at a little bit more of a diagonal in order to slowly build up this shadow. That'll help me to get, the different linear directions that as they're crossing will help me to get a smoother blend. And if you're like me and you love a smooth blend, I have a quick tips video with all of my favorite techniques for getting that nice smooth blend. But just as a quick tip beforehand, a lot of layers is one of the keys. So a lot of light layers is better than fewer, heavier layers. Right now I'm just going in between some of this foliage that we have down here. It's a little lighter over here, so I am going to lighten the contour here. Normally before I start shading, I would lighten the whole contour, but I want you to be able to see a little bit what's going on, so I've left a little more than I normally would. An interesting little highlight here. It just looks a little bit lighter down here. I'm going to take the kneaded eraser and just tap that just to pick up a little bit of excess graphite. It's not a lot. We're not, saving the world right here. But it will help make a little bit of a subtle difference just so it's not too noticeable. If you want a heavy hitter, go for something like this. But if you need some light cleanup, the kneaded eraser is your best friend. All right, we've got a good foundation there. We're going to need to go back and tighten everything up, but for the first time around, it's good to just kind of establish some of those values. Now this is in shadow, so I'm just going to start by bringing down some of this value. And I'm choking up a little bit so that I'm pressing a little bit harder, even without trying. And then I like how this is broken away a little bit from the trunk. Again, I don't know the actual terms for this, but I like visually having a little bit more separation in that than was in our reference image. I just think it's a little bit more interesting to have it break away. I'm just slowly building up through repeated layers to get the value that you want. I think I'm going to have another split. So we've got a split section here. I'm going to open it up there a little bit. Now I've waited for this darker section until I've got a little bit of like a shelf. So you can see there's this flattened down surface. This is what I'm using to draw on so that I'm not working with that point anymore. It gives me a softer, broader stroke overall. And that's how I'm able to get these dark sections without getting a big gash in my paper. I will still be able to build it up, but it makes for a little bit of a smoother blend. That's why I said if you have like a freshly sharpened pencil, it's kind of nice to just do a quick warm-up project or do something that's going to have a little bit more texture already so that you can kind of break your pencil in. I also know people who will shave their pencil down, but I'm kind of impatient. I just want to get started. So I usually just kind of jump in an area where it's not going to be as big of a deal. Now an area like this where we've got the full surface and we need that to be pretty smooth, I wouldn't want to touch this until I have my pencil broken in and I've had a little bit more of a warm up personally. And instead of working strictly like back and forth, I tend to work kind of in a circular motion, like really long ovals. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, Katrina, your tips are helpful, but I need a little bit more hand holding. Can you please talk to me like I'm 5? I go into a lot more detail in the full shading course. If you're like, I like drawing, I think that I could really get into shading, but I want to know all of the tips and tricks. I want to know all of the details. That course is for you. We dive into a lot of like the theory behind it. We dive into all of my favorite tricks, whether it's for texture, for illusion, all of the best ways to really build your object and really get that realism. And then even tips for creating your own style within realism. Because I'm not a photorealist personally. Like I'm not going to go in and I'm not going to get every single lump and bump in this whole mushroom, but I'm going to have a smooth blend by the end of this. It's going to have a lot of depth and detail, look very three-dimensional. And for me, that's what I'm going for. For you, you might want even more detail, but again, we talk about that in the full course. All right, now that we've got a good base on, we've kind of started to build up some of the more subtle areas. Now, if you're having trouble seeing some of the more subtle shadows, a good way to kind of emphasize those is to lean back from your reference image a little bit, or obviously your subject, and to squint your eyes. It just kind of helps different areas to pop, especially with those shadows. But I'm going to take this kneaded eraser, I've rolled it into more of a pointed section. I'm just going to kind of tap it down so that this area is flat, and I'm going to use that to press against our mushroom. And we'll have to go back in and adjust. But this will help to highlight some areas and kind of blend things together. Okay. Let's see. And I'm going to kind of erase some of that contour to allow this to be a little bit more lifelike. And now I'm just going to kind of tighten some areas up. All right, to get some of this texture in there, I'm just gonna build up with some lines and then kind of have some highlights next to them. There's not a ton of texture that is picking up, but visual texture anyway. I bet it does feel interesting, but I do kind of still want to have a little hint of what is there. So now we have the base down. I'm going to do just kind of a pattern of darker values over it with lighter values next to it to kind of help create some of that visual texture. And I might have to go back and blend it all together again just a little bit. So in this case, I was kind of just drawing sections like this. This is obviously larger. And sometimes I would V it out a little bit. And then highlighting kind of either within it or next to it. And then now, just to get it all tightened up again and just a little bit softer, I'm just kind of going over it again. In hindsight, I don't like this one. We're gonna get rid of it. All right, one thing you can do when you scar your paper like this is take a sand eraser. And we're basically going to remove a layer of the paper. And usually it works pretty well. It's not foolproof, and you definitely don't want to do this if you're going to be watercoloring on it. But it's good in a pinch. It's best to go a little bit wide. Be careful not to get any of the graphite into it. All right, back over with an eraser. And it's much better. I can continue to fuss with it and get it even closer to that edge to kind of get rid of that line. But usually, if it's good, you want to kind of stop. It can definitely be overworked, make the piece worse, and not save it. All right, I don't like how it seems just kind of wild down here, so I'm going to soften this a little bit, just so it's not quite so obnoxious. Thank you, baby. Yeah, what do you have? All right, now I'm going to take a pencil eraser. We're going to get some of these little highlighted bits in. It is a new day and I'm going to start in with just adding some finishing touches. A couple things I did off screen. I had a little bit of trouble because my baby came in. I did lighten this area. I'm going to go back in and I am going to deepen it, but I don't think it was quite as dark, or it should have been quite as dark as I had it. So we're going to go through and do that. So now I'm going to go back in still with my B pencil. We're going to finalize this. I'm using a piece of bath tissue or toilet paper in order to protect my work from any of the oils that are on my hands. So it's just a little bit more interesting than what we had before. What we had before was fine, but I do think being a little bit more careful with where I was placing our very darkest values gives this a little bit more of a story. A little bit less of a black hole, if we're honest. Now originally I just had too much going on down here, so I softened it a little bit by just going over it all with kind of the same value, but I don't want to lose all of the depth, especially because we want, since this is the base, we want there to be some weight there. So I'm going to bring a little bit of it back, not completely. On any areas that just need a little bit of that pop. So again, using the tissue to protect the paper from the oils on my hand. I'm usually more worried about this towards the end of a project. And I'm just looking for some of those more subtle, deeper shadows where I can just kind of add just a little something in here to further define what's going on. Looking for those subtle finishing elements. And honestly, exaggerating them. So if there's like a little bit of a shadow, kind of deciding, okay, do I want to lean into that and exaggerate it a little bit, like right here? Let it be even a little bit darker than it is in my reference image. Or am I just going to like ignore it altogether? Which sometimes, frankly, I choose to do. So that's the fun part about being an artist, is you kind of get to make it your own in that sense. And the very last thing that I did was I added a little bit more weight down here. You can see that it's just stronger than it was before, but I don't think I got a good angle of that. Just another layer, which is kind of the theme of adding shadows or shading in realistically with pencil, is that you're going through and you're adding layers. One thing I noticed that I talked about a lot and I didn't really elaborate on was when I would say, I'm going to go over this and tighten it up. Just meaning that any of like the empty spaces or the visual noise that happens when you're shading naturally, which is just kind of because there are a lot of strokes in between, when you go through and you tighten it up, you're kind of like tightening the space in between it, just making it smoother and tidier. So that's what it means for me anyway. I'm sure other artists have different phrases that they use, but that is one that I use consistently when I'm teaching. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, that you found it helpful, and that you learned a lot more about how to shade realistically. And if you'd like more instruction, tips and tricks, or just details about how to shade, I'll have all of those videos linked down below. I hope that you're having a wonderful, wonderful day, and until next time, happy drawing.